And now the microphone's on, thank you. So now you can hear me. It sounds really loud. Okay. So Sarah's kind of an inspirational person. She's done an awful lot of things, and one of the things that deeply impressed me when I first met her was she had just finished her Ph.D. in social psychology at Clark University, which is one of the most revered Ph.D. programs in psychology there is. And along with Rose Sokol at the time, they both finished their PhDs, and they said, let's start a journal. And they contacted me because they knew I was interested in evolutionary psychology and expanding evolutionary psychology, particularly in the Northeast. And we started the Northeastern Evolutionary Psychology Society. And they said, what do you think of this journal idea? And I'm like, all right, here's a couple of young kids with their brand new PhDs and a big idea. I love it. And they developed something called the Journal of Social, Evolutionary, and Cultural Psychology, which has become more and more successful each year. It's become the affiliated journal of the Northeastern Evolutionary Psych Society. It is on the brink of becoming one of the APA journals associated with the American Psychology Association, which we all know to be sort of the elite journals in the field of psychology. And it's just a great success story. In an earlier talk that Sarah just gave, in speaking a bit about the origins of J-sex, she said, you're going to find people who are going to tell you that you can't do that, and you should just ignore them. And not all the time, but a lot of the time, that is fantastic advice. She is the head of psychology at Dominican College down in Rockland County. She has published lots of articles that interface social, evolutionary, and cultural psychology. She has published in journals such as Behavior and Philosophy and Evolutionary Psychology, and she has an absolutely amazing double helix tattoo on her arm. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Strout.
And you forgot to mention I also have a peacock feather tattoo on my foot. It's important. You have to have sexual and natural selection in your tattoos. So as I've been introduced, I'm Dr. Sarah Strout, and only about an hour, it only took me about an hour to get here down from Rockland County, so that wasn't too bad. And what I'm going to be talking about today has been my newest ideas in research. I've done research on lots of other things like men in Jane Austen novels and other random stuff in evolutionary psychology. But the most interesting thing to me in evolutionary psychology is the fact that homosexuality has been ignored. So that was what my research started to look at. So the title is Two Men and a Baby, because I think it's funny. The reproductive success of homosexual males. And right away you might be saying, whoa, wait a minute, homosexual males can't have reproductive success. But obviously they do, because that's the title of my talk. So you'll find out about that. So just a little background about evolutionary psychology. There's two main Darwinian themes that we use in evolutionary psychology. You have natural selection, which is my DNA tattoo, or this owl moth up here. Traits that allow an organism to survive and, of course, reproduce are passed on via reproduction to successive generations. It's important to note that the traits have to help in the specific environment that the animal is in. So the owl moth is a moth that, if you look at it, looks like an owl, which keeps it from getting eaten by birds, because the birds say, oh crap, that's an owl, I better not eat that. In fact, it's a moth. And then you have sexual selection. Here we have the peacock, which is the big example, which is why I have a peacock feather tattoo. Traits that allow an organism to gain access to mates, even if those traits make them less likely to survive, are passed on via reproduction to successive generations. So the peacock is the best example. If you know anything about peacocks, only the men are peacocks, the females are peahens, and they are ugly. They're these ugly brown things. They're not pretty like this, only the men are. But the peacocks with the largest plumage are the ones that attract the most mates, but the ones with the largest plumage are the slowest to run away from things that are eating them, because those things are heavy. I mean, that's a lot of feathers. So it gets them mates, but it's likely to kill them. So evolutionary psychology focuses a lot on sexual selection. What are the things that actually make us likely to get mates, keep mates, have children, etc.? But both of these have one thing in common, which is reproduction. And already, if we're talking about homosexuality, the first word that comes to mind is not reproduction. So that's what I want to focus on. Because homosexuality has not been thought of as dealing with reproduction, this leads to what has been coined an evolutionary puzzle. Berman in 2003 described homosexuality as an evolutionary puzzle. Because if evolution works by having advantageous traits passed down via reproduction, right? So you have a good trait, it means you survive better and you're likely to have kids. Those kids have that trait, so they're more likely to survive and have kids, and each of those kids are likely to have this trait. And if homosexual men are not reproducing, then why does homosexuality continue to occur in every generation? So it presents a bit of a puzzle here. If we're talking about reproduction and homosexual men are not reproducing, then why do we keep seeing homosexuality in every generation? So that's the evolutionary puzzle. Just to give you some information about homosexuality, some statistics, a minimum of 3 to 4% of the population is homosexual. It basically depends on who you ask. Some people would report numbers as low as 2, some would report numbers as high as 10%. But if you look through most of the good research that's out there, it looks to be about 3 to 4% of the population is homosexual. They do have children, but they tend to have about 20% less children than homosexual men. And if you ask homosexual men about their children, more than half of them report having children. So if we just look at these statistics, we see that homosexuality is highly heritable. For example, schizophrenia, which we know is highly heritable, is only in about 1% of the population, whereas homosexuality we see 3 to 4%. And they seem to be having children. So the question of, oh, well, how does homosexuality get passed down if gay men are not having children? And I'm only focusing on men for this talk. Because women make it even more complicated, but they are already having children. Some of the problems with the studies that have looked at this, though, they didn't ask specifically, did you have children via intercourse? Did you use a surrogate? So the number, the 56.4% who reported having children, we don't know if they're biological via intercourse or if they are from surrogacy, in vitro, et cetera. So my research was going to look at that specifically. So not a lot of research has been done on homosexuality from an evolutionary perspective, but a few theories have come and gone to try to explain homosexuality. And I'd like to kind of go through what some of the basics in evolution, what they've looked at. So we have kin selection, which is that it somehow gives a benefit to relatives. Group selection, that groups benefit from having homosexuality. That it's a byproduct or a spandrel of hormones or some other, something else. Sexually antagonistic selection, which don't worry, I'll talk about all of these as I go through. Or the last one, which actually hasn't been studied up until I did mine, was that it actually might benefit the men themselves. So kin selection, the theory is that if you have, for maybe not enough men in your group, or maybe there's not enough women in your group, not enough women in your group, too many men, that if some of the men are gay, they can help take care of the nieces and the nephews. So this would be kin selection. It doesn't benefit the male himself, it benefits his relatives. So the idea is that you might find more homosexual men in groups that have larger ratios of men to women. In terms of the evidence, there's not that much evidence for this. I did find research on this one tribe in Samoa where they do report having homosexual men in their tribe, and they are specifically charged with taking care of nieces and nephews. But most of the other hunter-gatherer tribes we look at, or other modern populations, don't really seem to show that like homosexual uncles tend to babysit more than straight uncles. We don't really see that. For group selection, so it's the idea that if you have a group that has homosexuals in it, they would do better than groups that don't have homosexuals in it. I'll just get to the point. There's like no evidence at all to support this. It would be an interesting thing to look at as maybe like an honors thesis or something, but really we don't seem to find like this one group that has homosexuality does better, and that's probably because every group has homosexuality in it. So how could you compare which one's better than the other? So no evidence for that, although I'm sure David Sloan Wilson would be angry at me for saying that, but it's the truth. Another interesting hypothesis is that homosexuality is a byproduct of hormones, basically, that the prenatal environment is responsible. So the idea is that the more male pregnancies a woman has, the better her body becomes at fighting off testosterone. And since testosterone is involved in the masculization of male babies, and to some extent female babies when they're in utero, that the more sons she has, the more likely the later sons will be gay, because she gets better off at fighting this testosterone, because she somehow doesn't want it in her body. Obviously not consciously. There is some evidence for this in that the probability of any son being gay increases with the number of brothers born before that child. So the more male children a mother has, the more likely she is to have gay children, gay sons. Daughters don't seem to make a difference. That's why it kind of supports this claim, because she could have like 9 daughters and 1 son, and it's not likely that the son would be gay, but if she had nine sons and then another one, he'd be more likely to be gay. So that's one of the things that's interesting. There's also this idea of sexually antagonistic selection, which is the idea that there are traits that are beneficial to one sex that would be disadvantageous to the other sex. And it's not passed down just through one sex, so it's not associated with like an X or a Y chromosome. So a mother who is highly sexually active and highly attracted to men will have lots of children because she has this high sex drive and attraction towards men. But then her sons might get that trait, and it makes them gay, which according to many theorists would mean they don't have kids at all. I should have put this picture with the last slide, because does anyone know who these people are? What? Do you know the show? Nobody knows this? The Duggars? 19 kids and counting? Okay, this woman, actually she had 20 kids, but I think one of them just recently didn't make it. 19 kids. It should have been with the other slide, because I would say, look at all those sons. Those little ones are definitely going to be gay, right? If that's, and they're highly religious, so they would be really mad at me for saying that. But so it should have been with the other slide. But I guess it also could work for this slide too, that she obviously is having a very high fitness rate for herself of having 19 children. I think only like 2 of them are twins. I think the rest are singles. So evidence for this, mothers with gay sons tend to have larger families in general. So this would be the idea that, mothers who are highly attracted to men and have a high sex drive are, passing that trait on to their sons who end up being gay. The reason this evidence doesn't quite work is the more children you have, the higher your probability of having any gay child, right? So it kind of doesn't really work, right? The one before it is interesting because it only relates to whether she has sons, not daughters. But this one, the more kids you have, the more likely any one of your kids is going to be gay. Basic statistics, right? Okay, so then perhaps there's this crazy idea that homosexuality might just benefit homosexuality men, or it's neutral, that it doesn't really matter whether they're heterosexual or homosexual. There's a really funny, I love this hypothesis, and I bring up this hypothesis whenever I can do it because it gives me an excuse to swear and not get in trouble. The sneaky fucker hypothesis by Maynard Smith. Has anyone heard of this before? Just a few people. Okay. So this was in deer, actually. It was noted that, the big, strong deer with the big antlers, they'd go out and be headbutting each other, like beating each other up, going off on their own, while these little male deer, who basically looked like female deer, would be like, oh, okay, whoop, they're gone, let's go have sex with the females. And they'd have sex with the females. So acting feminine, in a way they were tricking the masculine men into thinking they were no threat, right? Because I'm just this little thing, don't worry about me. And then they would have sex with all the female deer, while the male deer were kind of fighting with each other. So at least for deer, it was advantageous to be friendly. I think that there are situations in which men pretend to be gay or feminine in order to get with women, but I don't think that's what most men do. Most gay men, I should say. I think most gay men really aren't attracted to women, but I'm sure most of you know someone who, the girlfriend says, oh, don't worry, honey, I'm pretty sure he's gay. Yeah, until they get married 3 years later, right? He tricked you. So that's for deer. I'm not sure it applies to human men, but I just love saying the sneaky fucker hypothesis. Maynard Smith was a crazy guy too. If you ever get a chance to just look him up, he was nuts. So maybe homosexuality does not affect your reproduction in a negative sense. That was sort of where I was coming from. I have lots of friends who are gay. I've researched lots of people who are gay, and they all have kids. So I was like, what's this crap about gay people not having kids? Go talk to someone who's gay. Like, half of them have kids if you're over 25. So I just thought it was a stupid assumption that they made. Okay, so the question becomes, how can homosexual men reproduce if they're not attracted to women? That's the big question, right? So isn't attraction necessary for sex? How many people think you have to be attracted to someone to have sex with them? Right, I'm talking to college students, they know, right? Maybe the older folk who think so, okay. But a lot of people just assume this. Well, how could you have sex with someone if you're not attracted to? Well, my answer is that straight men have been doing it all the time. These are some famous queens who had lots of kids who are obviously not that attractive, Maybe they were back then, I don't know. Maybe the portrait just wasn't flattering. But I do think artists generally painted them nicer than they looked, so then it makes me wonder what they really look like. But no, I mean, come on, to say that, a gay man can't have sex with a woman because he's not attracted to her is crazy, because straight men have sex with people they're not attracted to all the time. It's not like it's not like you have to be attracted to have sex. And I'm not a man, so I can't say this, but my male friends have said, yeah, you can pretty much have sex with anything. What is it, American Pie, the movie, like he had sex with an apple pie. Like, I don't think you can be attracted to an apple pie. So I think that's a silly problem. I don't think it is a problem that gay men aren't attracted to women, so they can't have sex with them. I think if a gay man wants to have a baby, he could have sex with a straight woman to have a baby. I mean, there's an end result there. It might not be comfortable or pleasant or something he would do every day, but it's not impossible, which is how a lot of researchers made it. And they made it sound it was like impossible for a gay man to achieve an erection with a straight woman. So my basic assumption is that homosexual men are no different than heterosexual men when it comes to mating, except that they're attracted to men. So a lot of other research that has been done has showed there really isn't as much of a difference as we used to think. In the early 80s, there was lots of research that came out saying gay men have female brains, and gay men are just like women. But when you actually get to the research, they're more research shows that they're more similar to straight men than they are to straight women. There was this idea that if you had a gay man, he would be like a straight woman, and if you had a gay woman, she'd be like a straight man. But it doesn't hold out. It seems that your sex is more important than your sexual orientation when it determines your sexual behavior. So women tend to act more like women, and men tend to act more like men, regardless of whether they're homosexual or heterosexual. Does that make sense? Okay. So they can, and they might choose to, specifically have sex with women so that they can have children. Today, obviously, we have lots of other options, in vitro fertilization, surrogacy, etc. But if we're coming from an evolutionary perspective, we're looking at brains that evolved in a time when none of this was available, when your only option, if you were gay, to have a baby would be to sleep with a female. So I have been doing some research this semester that hasn't even really been analyzed, so I only have percentages here. But I said, you know, why don't we just ask gay men if they want to have babies? Crazy idea. Like, let's just ask them. So I have 113 gay men. I'm still doing stats on it. But I said, would you like to have biological children? Okay. 87% said, yes, I would like to have children. Okay. If the only way for you to have a biological child was to have sex with a woman, would you? Fair question. 78% said, yes, they would. And then I asked, do you think you must be attracted to someone in order to perform sexually? And like most of you, 94% said, no, you don't have to be. So there's a lot of other stuff I'm asking, but I thought that's interesting. You know, I keep talking about gay men wanting to have babies. Well, how do I know? Well, now I do, because I asked them and they told me. Right? So it's not just me sort of putting that on them. Okay. But they want to have kids. If the only way they could do it was to have sex with a woman, they would, and they don't think they have to be attracted to someone to perform sexually. Okay. So the research that came before this was whether they have kids at all. So my research I presented at NEEPS and I presented in Vienna when I was there over the summer was, do gay men have babies? If so, how do they compare to straight men? Does it matter whether they were stepchildren, adopted children, etc.? And could I figure out something that might predict which gay men were more likely to have children, the same way we can for straight men? So I wanted to be able to look at that. So it is a comparison between gay and straight men, but a little like also within subject design as well. So the way I got my participants was I used Facebook because it's magic. I basically joined every single gay support group there was on Facebook. My mom was a little confused. My friends asked if I needed to tell them something. I'm like, no, I'm still straight. And I basically posted to those pages because I needed to get gay people, right? And then I also found people who just mailed it to, like, you know, this men's swimming team or their college students or, I don't know, their family reunion, whatever it was. So it's kind of like, you know, you send things out on Facebook and everybody forwards them. So they end up going to people you have never been able to get, you know, on your own. That's why I think Facebook is so cool. So I invited them to participate in the study. It was an online survey only. I was trying to get, you know, it's a pilot study. Nobody's ever looked at any of this. So I just wanted to do quick and dirty, get a lot of people and just sort of get an idea of what we should be looking at in the future. So it was an online survey only. Basically, I ended up with 306 participants in 2 weeks. For anyone who's done research, you should gasp at that, because it's really hard to get participants. I got 306 people in 2 weeks using Facebook. All men. If I had women as well, it probably would have been 600, so that's cool. I ended up with about 175 heterosexual men and 131 homosexual men. I knew, though, that I had to make sure that my two groups had the same age, because age is a huge factor when it comes to how many children you have. The older you are, the more kids you have, right? So I didn't want to end up with a whole bunch of 20-year-old gay guys and 40-year-old heterosexual guys, right? Straight guys. So I did matching. If you guys have taken research methods, you might talk about matching your participants as a research design. So basically, if I had a gay man who was 22, I made sure I had a straight man who was 22. If I had a gay guy who was 44, I made sure I had a straight guy who was around 44. So that way, the mean ages of the groups would be the same. So I didn't have this confound of age. And for the groups, both of it ended up being around 39 was the mean age, give or take 2 years. And this is great for research because usually our mean age is about 20 because we use college students. So having 40 as the average is great. And it ranged from 19 to 74. That's awesome. Great spread of people. So this is an actual normal sample. It's not a college sample. So that's one of the benefits of it being online. So just the questions that I asked them, I was pretty specific. How many genetically related live births via intercourse? So we would not be confused at all. They're genetically related. The child is alive and it was through intercourse. How many genetically related miscarriages via intercourse? How many genetically related abortions via intercourse? How many stepchildren? How many adopted children? I don't know why I have adopted children. I really want to show you it's adoption. And how many children via some kind of surrogacy? So unlike the other studies of just saying, hey, do you have kids? I wanted to see what kind of kids. Are they related to you? Are they stepchildren? Are they adopted children? Surrogacy, etc. So this is the results for that first research question. You'll see that heterosexual men do have more biological children, live births via intercourse, than homosexual men. Not a huge difference, but that's statistically significant. More stepchildren as well, heterosexual men. Gay men had more adopted children than heterosexual children, but it was a really low number, and I mentioned in the talk earlier, and that's probably because we have so many regulations against gay parents adopting. And then there was no difference for surrogacy. I think surrogacy, in vitro, those kind of things are becoming more common in heterosexual relationships as well in homosexual, because a lot of women and men are waiting a long time to have children, and it becomes harder. The fertility becomes lower as we age. So there's no difference there. So that's your pretty graph. If you're interested in actual statistics, the heterosexual people, as I said, had higher numbers of stepchildren and genetically, biologically related children via intercourse. Homosexual participants had higher numbers of adopted children, and no difference for genetically related children via surrogacy. The interesting thing to me is what we call the effect size. I don't know how many of you have taken statistics, but the effect size basically tells you how big is the difference that you found. Is it a big difference or is it a small difference? And these are really small effect sizes. So it seems to me that there is a statistically significant difference between stepchildren, biologically related children, and adopted children, but it's not a huge difference. It's not like, oh my goodness, the straight men are having 10 children and the gay men are having 1. I mean, if you go back for the averages, it was around 3 for heterosexual men, and it was around 2.6 or so for gay men. So not a huge difference, but it is statistically significant. So for those of you doing research, always look at your effect sizes, because you might find a statistically significant result, but realize it's not as big of a deal as you thought because it has a smaller effect size. So my question was, okay, do they have children? Yes, they have children. So my second research question was, okay, what would predict who has more children? Because we know they're having kids. Who's going to predict if they have more or less children? We know for straight men that testosterone or androgens are a great indicator or a great predictor of whether they're going to have lots of children or not. Higher levels of testosterone generally lead to more kids. So I thought, well, why don't we just see if that's the same thing for gay men? Big problem. I have no money. My school has no money. We also don't have a lab. And I'm at a very, very small, we only have 2,000 students, school down in Rockland County. So I had no lab, anyone to run it for me. And in order for me to get actual testosterone, it would be incredibly expensive to send it to a lab to do it for me. Also, don't forget, I was doing an online study with 250 people. There's no way I could collect that many people if I had them come in. But I really just wanted to know if there was something going on. If there was, then maybe I could do a study, to see directly, measure it directly. So my solution was, you know what? There's lots of things we know that are related to testosterone. Why don't I just ask them about that and measure it indirectly? Just get a sense of whether there's anything going on there. So that's what I did. There are 3 things we know that are highly related to testosterone. Facial hair or shaving frequency. Men who have high testosterone have to shave more often because they have thick, dark, lots of hair growing, They also tend to be really hairy on their bodies. I could have added that in as well, like how much of your body is covered in hair, but I didn't. So how often do you shave? Whether you are losing hair or have hair loss, men who have high testosterone also tend to lose their hair earlier and in larger amounts. So if you see, like Vin Diesel has high testosterone because he's like bald, right? All the bald guys. Go for bald guys, they have high testosterone. Or guys losing their hair. And then sex drive. It's pretty obvious. Higher testosterone leads to higher sex drive. So the more you report your sex drive being higher, the higher testosterone. Obviously, these are self-reported, meaning I ask them, tell me. And I thought, oh man, sex drive, they're all going to put 100, because it's from 0 to 100. This is going to be awesome. They were really honest. Like, there were people who put like 3 for their sex drive, who put like 17. I was like, okay, they're pretty honest about their sex drive. Because like with men, if you ask them how many people they've slept with, you minus 7, right? For women, you add 7, right? So I just assumed, you didn't know that? That's how it works. I just assumed that they'd lie about their sex drive, but they didn't. So I'm not like a crazy great statistician. I have friends who are. Sometimes I play one on TV. But I just said, okay, I'm just going to do this. And I'm sure some statistician could tell me why I'm dumb for doing it. But most of us think in terms of like 0 to 100 or 1 to 100. So I basically said, on a scale of 1 to 100, how high is your sex drive? And then I asked them how often they shaved. And these were the options I came up with. Never. And I said, how often do you need to shave? Not how often do you shave. Never, 1 time a month, 1 time a week, 2 times a week, daily, or more than once a day. So I just did 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And whether they were balding or not balding, you get nothing. Balding or bald, you get 50, which gave me 0 to 200. I also look at them separately. So if you're a stats guru, I can show you. It's okay. So all of them separately were related to one another. So, people who had a high sex drive also said that they were bald or balding or had to shave a lot. And each of them separately was related to the number of children as well. For both men, heterosexual men and homosexual men, their total score for the androgen or the testosterone was positively related to the number of genetically related children. So I only looked at those genetically related live births. I didn't look at stepchildren, adoption, etc. And it was positively related to that, meaning the higher the androgen score, the higher the number of children. This is just the correlations between each of the groups. So sex drive and number of biological children was positively correlated. Their shaving amount was also positively correlated. Balding, whether they're bald or balding, was also positively correlated to the number of children. And then adding them all up, the total androgen score also was. So I probably could have picked any one of them to use, but I was freaked out that one wouldn't work. That's why I tried to come up with at least 3, because no one had done anything like this before, so I was kind of just jumping in to the pool. So that's the correlations for that. So testosterone does seem to be related to the number of children you have, whether you're gay or straight, doesn't seem to matter. There was no there was no statistically significant difference between gay and straight men and these correlations. So there was no difference in terms of which thing was more related to number of children. So, so the first question I had was, okay, well, do gay men have biologically related children at all? Yes, they do. Obviously, these numbers are smaller than straight men, but they are having, I guess, I don't know if you call it a significant amount, but they are having some children. So in this way, it might be that homosexuality is not necessarily beneficial, because it's not like it's having them have more children. It might be neutral in that it doesn't make them have no children. So it could be a neutral trait that doesn't really do something. Or it could be that homosexuality itself has a totally different advantage for homosexual men. The research that I'm starting to do, we're actually just recently talking about it with Peter Jonathan in Australia, is to look at whether homosexuality is more about the pair bond, because I know that pair bonding is extremely important for couples, and if there aren't enough women to go around or something, the population produces men who are attracted to each other for pair bonding. I mean, there's a lot of other things. It doesn't have to come down just to sex, that being homosexual makes you have more kids or makes you have less kids. So there could be a totally different advantage that keeps homosexuality in the population that has nothing to do with reproduction or sex at all. When we look at testosterone, of course, completely indirectly, not as good as if I could have measured it itself, the number of children relates to the testosterone level. And again, I think this goes back to the idea that gay men aren't different than straight men. And a lot of researchers and people in evolutionary psychology seem to have this idea like, oh, gay people are so different from straight people. And I mean, I think most of us just talking with our friends would be like, no, they're not. So why, as an evolutionary psychologist, do I have to assume that there's something different? When evolutionary psychologists do research, they take out the homosexual participants because they're afraid they'll mess up their data. So one of the things I really want to show in this, besides the fact that gay men are having babies, is that they're not that different. So a lot of the research I'm doing next is to show even more that gay men, gay women, etc., are not that different and don't need to be removed from research as if they're like a contaminant in your subject pool. So that would be my main thought about that. Obvious limitations, sampled from Facebook. A lot of people say this is a bad research method. I went on a tangent already in the other room about why I think Facebook is great. So feel free to yell at me after if you want to. It was an online study. Again, why do I have that twice? It was an online study. Other people, again, would argue that that's a limitation. The biggest limitation, obviously, is that I couldn't measure testosterone directly. So you have to take the testosterone stuff, I guess, with a grain of salt, because it's like I'm measuring one thing that's related to testosterone. I'm not measuring testosterone itself. So I think a really great research project for someone to do would be, if you have a lab, to actually do these hormonal assays. What I wanted to finish with is, I know many people in here are students, whether you're undergrads or graduate students. I always like to give people ideas for what I think you could do with this, because I'm only one person, and I'm pretty much the only person doing this, except for Sarah Radke, who's in Canada, doing any really evolutionary stuff with homosexuality. So there's tons of room for people to do this. So obviously, I think a great research project would be to measure testosterone directly and then ask the same questions I did about how many kids they have, et cetera. Also, just measuring in different populations, right? Maybe it was just my sample that made this result come out this way. Replication is really important, and I don't think that we do enough replication. There's something to be said for doing the same exact thing as other people, instead of just saying, hey, they already did that. Because how do you know it wasn't just something they messed up? So replicate stuff is always good. maybe start looking at the reproductive success of gay females. I explained in the other talk that it's a really complicated procedure because men tend to say they're either straight or gay, and that's it. There's no in between. Very few men will even say they're bisexual. But women kind of don't like to label themselves. Like, well, I was in college, you know, she was nice, and, you know, and then that guy was, you know, I loved him forever, but he was mean to me, so then I went out with her. But they wouldn't say they're gay, you know, so they have more sexually have higher sexual fluidity, we call it. They can kind of float in and out and it doesn't really affect them to say that they're gay or not. So good luck with that, if you want to do that. You really would have to find people who say, I am exclusively gay, I want nothing to do with men, versus I am exclusively straight, I want nothing to do with women. You'd have to do that. Looking for other variables besides testosterone that could affect male reproduction, and then testing it both with homosexual and heterosexual men. So going into the literature, seeing what people have looked at previously for straight men, and then seeing if it applies for homosexual men. Examining reproductive success in non-human animals that show homosexual behavior. Is it a detriment? Are the bonobos who act gay having less, you know, children than the ones who aren't? You know, we know that there's homosexuality in lots of non-human primates and other species, but has anyone looked at whether it affects their reproductive success? I don't know. I haven't studied the biology of it, but that might be interesting for a bio student. For people who are interested in literature, I mean, when we talk about evolution, we always kind of think of like the hard sciences, but a lot of my research has been done on literature. So I think it might be interesting to look at how literature has dealt with homosexual fathers in the past. Did they make it seem like it was accident, or they were forced into a straight relationship? Was it the sneaky fucker hypothesis, right, where they were pretending to be gay but they weren't? Like, how has literature have looked at homosexual dads? A historical one, if you're interested in history, would be to look at, so if homosexuality is supposed to benefit a group, do some research to see, historically, groups that accept homosexuality or even, I don't know, force people to do it, do they thrive better than groups that sort of are against homosexuality? It might be an interesting thing to look at. It doesn't even have to be historically. You can look at specific hunter-gatherer groups today and see if there's any differences that way. But I figured I would give you guys some ideas for, you know, master's thesis, honors thesis, whatever you have to do. Try to get you going. And so, of course, I have to say thank you to Dr. Glenn Geher, my NEEPS peep, who I've known for 7 years now. I figured it out, 7 years. And Brianna Tauber for being super awesome. She's the most organized person I know, so that's good. Thank you. Already questions? Yes?
So you mentioned that there's a fairly constant rate of homosexuality in the population.
Yeah.
And you made some points that there's a genetic component to this, certainly in the earlier talk. Just wondering if anybody's done any pedigree analysis to see if you can make lineage connections and actually support that point.
That would be. I don't think anyone has done it. Right now, the main focus of the genetic research is looking for specific alleles and, you know, things that could be just in, you know, homosexual people versus others. But I don't think anyone's done like lineage things or generational things at all. But that would be really cool to do. I mean, you probably have to start with a family one and try to, it'd be hard to get the data perhaps. Especially like if you go back to like 1800 and stuff, are they going to admit they had a gay person in their family? But that would be really cool to do, yeah. Yeah, but no one's done that yet.
I have an interesting about the sex drive of bald men as you hear that. Then I just want to say that I find bald men attractive.
You should. They have higher reproductive.
And I'm saying this because I'm wondering if the higher sex drive of bald men could be possibly explained by maybe a slightly lower interest in.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about baldness and testosterone is generally during their high reproductive years, they're not bald, right? They tend to become bald later on in life. And it's because of the higher testosterone actually breaks down the hair follicles for some reason. I don't know, like, the specifics about it, like a chemist or something might know it. But so I would say they're actually not bald when they're probably having most of their kids, which is interesting, right? That we would find bald men sexy, because now I guess if you're a young woman looking for someone who you definitely want to have kids with and they're older, it would be good to look at the bald guy because that's a pretty good indication of it. But they typically don't bald until later in life. So.
Because you have to go across cultures, because it seems like in our own culture.
Yeah.
I mean, the media, they just make it sound like a horrible thing. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think that we're vain, and so it becomes a big issue. We also have, I've heard, on like an NPR thing or something, that wearing hats is one of the reasons why our men are starting to recede their hairlines and stuff. All you guys who wear your hats everywhere, yeah. Because it actually rubs at the follicles, and that's why you get the weird receding things. So take off your hats if you don't want to lose your hair. But yeah, in life that they have that, yeah. Yes. Oh, that's a great question. I didn't. The measure that we use to assess homosexuality is a scale where at one end you're 100% heterosexual, at the other end is 100% homosexual. Then you have 75% homosexual, 25% heterosexual, 75% I'm doing heterosexual, 25% homosexual, and then 50-50. And then we only look at the people who did 100 and 100, just so we weren't confused. I can go back later and add in other people, but I chose people who said they were exclusively heterosexual or exclusively homosexual. That's a great point. If you just ask people, are they gay or not, it's not a very good way of finding out if they are or not, because people define it different ways. So this way we were very, specific about, that part. Good point. Yes?
What's the prenatal environment, and why does it make the body of the mother become better at fighting off male hormones and subsequent male pregnancies?
Okay, good question. So the prenatal environment, right, is the environment that the fetus is in before the baby is born, right? And the hypothesis is that because females don't have much testosterone, although they have testosterone, they don't have as much as men, and testosterone is important for development in the male fetus, for the masculinization of the fetus, that a female body would want to fight against having that much testosterone in her body. So the idea is that each time she's pregnant with a male child, she would get better and better at fighting off the testosterone. No real research done on it, but it's a hypothesis. It's kind of like the, some women are RH positive, negative, what's that? Your blood type is positive or negative. And if you have a baby that's negative blood type and you're positive blood type, you have to get this shot to make it, right? It's kind of an idea like that. Yeah.
I think the survey is whether the mother of the child is straight or
That's a good question. I didn't ask other questions like how many children their mother had, how many children their father had, how many children their brothers had, sisters. I didn't include all that in there, but I actually never asked about the mother of the children. That would be interesting to ask. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Testosterone is affected by pretty much everything. The other talk I was saying, if men win a game, their testosterone goes up. If men lose a game, their testosterone goes down immediately. When men are in secure monogamous relationships, their testosterone tends to go down, versus when they're single, their testosterone tends to go up. Other things can be affected, like the new stuff talking about the laptops. Have you heard about the laptops on your lap? Don't do it. Your fertility goes down from too much heat in that area for men. Not related to testosterone, but just a little safety tip for you. Don't put your laptop on your lap. It's not just for now. You're like, oh, thank God, I don't want to have kids now. Anyway, I'll put my my laptop. No, it's bad, like future-wise too. So if you ever want to have kids, keep your laptop off your lap, or buy one of those cooling pads. Yeah. Yeah, diet's important too, absolutely. Diet, chemicals in the air. I mean, any of your hormones can be affected by all of the stuff around you. So just being around too many women, like things like that, will actually change the men's testosterone. So it's not like it's a stable thing, but within those differences, men still on average would be higher than other men. So it might fluctuate individually, but they would still start off higher than the other guys. So, but yeah, everything can affect any of the hormones. Yeah. In the back.
Yeah, prenatal byproduct. The argument that as they get better at fighting off testosterone, the child has less testosterone in them. So earlier you said that homosexual and heterosexual males have the same. So with that.
Great point. Exactly. The hypothesis has been, or was in the 80s and before, that homosexual men have less testosterone. So when people come up with these ideas, it's under the assumption that they have less testosterone. It's not necessarily that the baby has less testosterone, though. It's that the testosterone within that environment, which, for example, masculinizes the brain and stuff, isn't there. But yeah, the ultimate idea is, if you're gay, it's because you had less testosterone. When the research we have now shows they don't. They have similar amounts. So it doesn't really work. Yeah. Yes?
I just wanted to ask you to almost clarify the point about effect sizes, because I was thinking that in evolutionary biology, you don't necessarily need to have massive effect sizes for effects over time to accumulate. So I just wanted you to reiterate what conclusions you were drawing when you said look at the low effect size.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There was a statistically significant difference in the number of biological children that heterosexual and homosexual men had, period. Typically, when we do any sort of mating studies, we get huge effect sizes, very, very nice effect sizes. There's my Freudian slip. And in this one, I was surprised. I know, yeah, you can have a low effect size and it can go for generations, but I was surprised that gay men didn't have so many less children than straight men. That was sort of my surprise. Wow, they're not that different. If I just, when I came into it, I would have thought maybe 1 or 0.3 children for gay men and 4 for straight men. So I was surprised that there wasn't as big of a difference between them, not in terms of but the number of children they had. I thought it would be bigger. So that was interesting to me. So I mean, the main point is they are having kids. They're still having less kids than heterosexual men, but they are having kids. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. In the same vein, we were talking a little bit about acculturation in the last group.
Yeah.
The term used to be latent homosexual. And when you're looking at your group, did you look at the age ranges differently to see if there was a difference between younger men, straight men, and younger gay men?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I looked at everything. Age for both groups, the older you were, the more kids you had, right, in general. But looking at whether there was more of one, there weren't any differences in that I matched the ages ahead of time. I didn't go in and then group them by age and then see if there were differences, which would be interesting to look at. Because I do think there's something interesting happening in this generation where men especially are coming out a lot earlier. And it could be that the reason a lot of these older men had children was because they were forced into straight relationships during their high reproductive years. So I think it would be really interesting to see if that is the effect, but you have to wait until this generation kind of gets to actually having kids. So that's another 10 years. But I mean, it totally could be a thing well, it doesn't happen anymore in 10 years. and I'm totally wrong because they just were forced to be in straight relationships. So yeah, it'd be interesting to do that, but I have to wait. Longitudinal study for those of you who still have 10 years left of your education.
Actually, side follow-up to that was, do you have any thoughts about that, the change in the current generation? Because there's many more men now willing to admit that they're bisexual than there were 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So it can be a very big difference.
It is. Still less men than women. Like, women are still always going to be more likely to say that they can kind of float back and forth. But I think that there is a definite shift in the culture. Even the fact that straight guys, and I'm sure if you stood up, I would see many of you wearing like skinny jeans. Like, if you go back a generation, like, that would have never happened, that men and women wore the same kind of jeans, like the tight jeans. I think that there's a feminization going on, or maybe not even a feminization, but an equalization of these like gender stereotypes. I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens, especially from a mating perspective. Because, you know, typically men have been aggressive, the aggressor going after relationships. And we're kind of seeing a switch now where females are, especially in college campuses, females are becoming more aggressive. Like, how is that going to relate to evolution, evolutionary psychology? It's really cool stuff happening right now. Yeah. Glenn, yeah.
So I've been teaching evolutionary psych since 1990.
Never.
I
Yeah.
just realized.
You're so old.
This is such a.
I wasn't even born then. No, just kidding.
It was 15 years.
I was, no.
And this is a question that always comes up.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of these, like, whenever you teach it, I can always anticipate how does this exist if evolutionary psychology is right.
That's how they disprove evolution in itself, right?
Right.
Well, how did that go? Yeah.
And homosexuality is one of the clear, common examples that recurs. So I think that your research is just fantastic in its ability to speak to that issue about reproductive success of male homosexuals. And I've taken to using this as an example for discussion about that issue in my class. So I think it's just great research that way.
Oh, thanks.
I guess an additional question relates to post-contraceptive society. So all the relationships that you're looking at have to exist in a place, and probably primarily where contraception exists. Under ancestral conditions, I was born in non-contraceptive societies. I wonder if you find the same patterns.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question becomes whether our minds have picked up enough to be able to assimilate that we can have sex and not get pregnant, right? Because the idea is that, you know, evolution takes quite a long time, and maybe our brains haven't caught up with that fact. I don't know if, I think it'd be really interesting to look at cultures today that don't have contraception and see if there's a difference, because then that would suggest that yes, our brains have adjusted to the fact that you can have sex and not get pregnant. From the sex research that we do, though, it looks like our brains can't figure that out. That a lot of the ways we engage in sex, we still engage in as if we can impregnate someone. For example, Becky Birch's stuff about if a partner is away, a female partner is away, the male still thrusts harder, deeper, quicker, has sex with her more, etc., even if he's using a condom. Right? So in his head is thinking he's increasing the chances of impregnating her, but he has a condom on. So there seems to be research to suggest that we kind of can't figure out that we have contraception, even though consciously we do. So I don't know that you would see any difference. But it would be interesting to look at anything relating to contraception to compare the non-contraceptive cultures with other ones. That would be a good research topic for people too, to see if there's any differences that way. You know, like, did they avoid sex more in those cultures because they might get pregnant and we don't? I mean, I don't know if there's any work been done on that yet. So, did someone? Yeah.
Did you take into account in your research the ethnicity of the participants?
Yeah.
Certain ethnicities had higher percentages of gay men, period?
Yeah, I looked. There weren't any differences in the ethnicities. I had a fairly representative sample of like 60%, was it 60% Caucasian, 20% African American, 10% Asian, and then other for the rest of them, but I didn't find any differences in specific ethnic groups, which is interesting because it's been suggested that white men would be more likely to be gay. But I don't know that there's actual research showing that, but that's kind of one of those things that people say. But I didn't find any differences in the ethnicity or in religion, which I found really interesting because some of my previous research has been done on whether religion affects when gay men come out and things like that. And so I asked people what their religion was and how religious they were. And I thought for sure this will have some effect, but it didn't. It really had no effect at all. Which I found bizarre because in my previous research, when I looked at sociosexuality, which is like how okay you are with casual sex, religion was a huge part with gay men, that gay men who were highly religious had very low sociosexuality, but it didn't seem to affect this research. So, yeah, it's interesting. Yes?
That's my last question.
You sure?
Yeah, last one. So I've read a couple of mathematical articles that try to model this.
Yeah.
And at least from their perspective, the sexually antagonistic hypothesis has received the most support. So I was surprised when you kind of like smacked it down relatively quickly.
Well, it's okay. Mathematically, I know nothing about mathematics generally. I can do my SPSS and stuff like that, but mathematical models. For research that has been done on human, like actual research done on human, there hasn't been anything to show this. Mathematical models, like for game theory and things like that, there's lots of research, you know, that that eventually, you know, the evil guy will take over the island and you'll all die, kind of stuff. But you'd have to, I think, as a psychologist, I'd have to put those people on the island and watch them die to really say that it's real. Like the mathematical models don't speak to me. So if that seems to be the most likely, I think that's interesting. But from the social sciences, there isn't evidence for it. So, because not everything follows what the numbers, you know, say they should. People are weird, right? There's lots of error, not so much true score, lots of error, right? So, yes, sir.
Just curious, this idea of fluidity.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, you were talking about homosexuality in the Greco-Roman society, things like that. I'm just wondering if there's no way to test this. I'm just curious about your opinion. Do you think this study would change the necessity for it as well as the potential results if Judeo-Christian society didn't solidify these gender roles and we were still living in a situation where there was fluidity in the natural sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for sure, we've created this thing called homosexuality, right? That is a social construction, of a sense, right? So if I was a Roman or a Greek, I wouldn't even think to do this study because everyone is gay and everyone's straight, right? You know what I mean? But because society has created this, there have become issues in the research, right, of like pulling these people out. So yeah, I think it's a total social construction. I say to my students whenever I'm talking about homosexuality, how weird is it that homosexual people have to come out and declare they like same-sex people, but heterosexual people just go around and never have to say anything? You know, I mean, it's a bizarre world when you actually start looking at it. You're like, what? What? Why does that make any sense? So yeah, I think a total social construction. There obviously are people, though, who are completely homosexual and people who are completely heterosexual. So I think that is interesting in and of itself, but I think that you'd have less issues with it if we didn't have this dichotomy, right? Or even, you know, throw in bisexuality. It's still viewing it as categories instead of, you know, a continuum, so, yeah. Yes?
The first one was biologically.
Yep.
What confused me was if you keep comparing it to a surrogate, how does the gay men have children with the woman if they're, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not being a surrogate for them, do they know about the relationship, or they can't be straight? How? Do you not deduct it?
I didn't find that out. That's something I think, that's what would be really interesting. I mean, I don't have too many questions because I wanted to get enough people and people start messing up, you have too many questions. But yeah, I think it would be so interesting to ask them, were you in a relationship with this person? Did you specifically have sex with this person to have a child? Did you pretend to be straight? How were the different ways? And I couldn't get into those differences there, but I think it would be really interesting to look at. Because if it just is that lots of people are having babies before they come out as gay, and then they don't have any more or something like that, then it becomes a whole nother issue, right? So yeah, it'd be cool, but I didn't get to do it. So another research idea for you. Everyone in here now has a research project. You know that, right? No excuses.
We've got time for one more question, and then there will be pizza party / reception in CSB 110, and this might be our best reception yet, so don't miss it.
Oh.
One more question.
One more question. No one ever has a question after you say one more question. Okay. Yes.
For the sake of playing devil's advocate,
Sure.
I'm curious what you think the response would be from heterosexual males if they were asked whether or not they would be willing to have sex with a man if that was the only way they could conceive a child.
Yeah.
And if they'd be more willing to have sex with a woman they're not attracted.
That's really great. Actually, in the thing I brought up, I do have heterosexual men as well. I just haven't gotten to parsing out that data. But I didn't ask them. What did I ask them? I asked them, would they be willing to have sex? I didn't ask a man, but I said, would you be willing to have sex with someone that you weren't attracted to, right, if it was the only way? But it'd be really interesting to put that in and put, if the only way to have a child would be to have sex with a man, would you? And I bet a lot less would say that they would.
Well, the reason I'm asking, and that's what I predicted too, that would show significant, I would think a significant difference, and I think the reason for it would be is because most of the men, homosexual men you surveyed, would have already had sex with a female at this point, right? So the thought of doing it again might be...
Well, they weren't all, actually. I did ask how many straight partners they had, how many gay partners they had, etc. And there were about a third of them who had never had sex with a female. So I haven't matched that up to their response. But yeah, I think also that there's such blatant homophobia in our culture that that's another reason why the men would be like, I'm not going to have sex with a man to do that. So, but yeah, that would be interesting. I didn't ask it that way, but that would be interesting to ask them. Yeah, that would really throw people off, actually, if I asked them that. But what do you mean? I can't have a baby with a man. Okay. Thanks, guys. I had fun.